Good morning, fifth graders. Today we are going to use what we have learned about equivalent fractions and decimals to start comparing and ordering fractions and decimals. So once again, you need to have your math notebook out and go ahead and pause the video and write compare and order fractions and decimals in your table of contents. Okay, once you are done writing that in your table of contents, go ahead and turn to your next blank page. We are going to look at comparing decimals and fractions. So here's an example of something you're going to be asked to do. You can see you have a decimal on one side and a fraction on the other. Now, in order to compare these, we are going to want to make them the same form. So we have decimals on one side and fractions on the other. Decimals are easier to compare than fractions. So we always want to see if we can turn a fraction into a decimal, let's do it. And in this case, we can because 20 is a factor of 100. So we're going to again show this work in our notebook. So make sure that you're on your next blank page and that you write compare and order fractions and decimals at the top. Draw your line down the middle for problem and work, and then go ahead and write our original problem in your math notebook. Pause the video to finish that right now. Once you have it written, you are then going to take this 2 5/20 and turn it into a decimal since we can. Now, if we couldn't turn it into a decimal, we would have to turn this one into a fraction and find a least common denominator. That's more work, which is why we're going to turn this into a decimal. So I write 2 5/20 over here on my work side. And I know that if I count by 20s, I will land on 100. Because remember, in order to turn a fraction into a decimal, we need our denominator to be the name of a decimal place, like 10th, 100th, or 1000th. I know that 20, if I count by 20, 5 times, I will get to 100. Whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator, so I get 2 25/100. As soon as I hear myself say that, I can hear myself say the decimal, 2 25/100. So now, because I'm comparing these, I'm going to go ahead and take that 2 35/100 and write it on my work side, and I'm going to use the 2 25/100 that is equivalent to 2 5/20 and write it right underneath, lining up my decimal points. Once I have them lined up, I go place by place to compare. So when I look at my ones place, I can see that they are the same. I move to my tenths place then, and I see they are not the same. 3/10 is greater than 2/10. That means 2 35/100 is greater than 2 5/20. So I put a greater than symbol right there. This would be your work. So if you were doing this problem on your slides, you would show this work either in your notebook or on your whiteboard. And then on the slide, you would put the greater than symbol, drag it right here, and take a picture of your work right here. That's our first example. We're going to do one more example in our notebooks right now. So go ahead and draw your horizontal line in your notebook because we're going to look at how to do a problem like this. We are going to drag these fractions and decimals in order from least to greatest. So again, we're using what we know about equivalent fractions and decimals to do this. So in your notebook, you have your problem and work line. You should have also made a horizontal line here because you're showing that we're doing a new problem now. So when I look at these, I want to see, can I make them all fractions or all decimals? And usually when I'm comparing, I want to make them all decimals. Because if I did this one, 325 thousandths, as a fraction, I would get all the way to my thousandths in my denominator, and that would be hard to find a common denominator with these numbers. That's a lot more work. If I can turn everything into a decimal, I want to try to. They are easier to compare. And I can turn these both into decimals. This one already has a decimal place, so it's going to be simple. And remember, I told you, when a denominator is 8, we have memorized that it can go to the thousandths because 8 times 125 is 1,000. So over on your work side, go ahead and write 1/8 and we want to turn that into a decimal, so we need a 10, 100, or 1,000 in the denominator. We know that 8 times 125 is 1,000, so that's what we're going to do here. We do the same thing to the numerator and the denominator. What we see is that 1/8 is equivalent to 125 thousandths. Then we want to write that as a decimal. 125 thousandths. 2/10 we also want to make a decimal. What's nice about 2/10 is I can already hear a decimal place right here, tenths. So I just need to write 0 and 2/10. Now I have everything in decimal form. So now I am going to stack all of my decimals with my decimal points lined up. So I have them all listed right here. Now when we look at this, you might notice that we have 2 places that are, or 2 of our numbers only go to the tens place. Remember, if it's to the right of the decimal point, you can add zeros to the end and keep it the same value. So if you want to do that, you can do that as well. Now we are looking for our least decimal. So when I look at the ones place, they're all the same because they're all zeros. But when I look at the tenths place, I can see that 125 thousandths is the smallest because it only has 1/10. My 125 thousandths is actually the 1/8 right here. That means that when I'm putting these in order, 1/8 is the smallest. So 1/8 is less than the next decimal or fraction I write. I'm going to cross off my 125 thousandths now that I'm done with it. Again, now I'm looking at my ones place and they are all the same. I'm still looking for my next smallest. Well, I have 2/10 right here and these other ones are 3/10. 2/10 is always going to be less than 3/10. The 2/10 as a decimal right here is what we originally had as a fraction here. So when I'm putting these in order, I'm going to use what I originally had. 2/10 is less than whatever my next one is. So again, I'm going to cross off the 2/10 because I know I'm done with it. Now I'm just comparing the 2 at the bottom. So again, I start in my ones place, and when I look at my ones place, they are both 0. So I have to move to my tens place. When you look in your tens place, they're both 3. 3/10 is the same, so I have to move to my hundredths place. And you should notice that our first one has 0 hundredths, and the second one there has 2 hundredths. 0 is less than 2. That means 3/10 is my next smallest. So I would write 0 and 3/10 as my next decimal. And then I would write my very last one, 325 thousandths. So this is in order from least to greatest. Now you should have been pausing and writing along with me. If you didn't, make sure you pause now and have everything that I wrote in your notebook, because just like yesterday and Monday, you are going to have to take a picture of your work and put it on your first slide today. Then I'm going to show you how this would look, how you would do this and answer this question on your slides, because you're going to have a problem just like this. So once we solved that problem, you just have to drag these in the correct order. So we said 1/8 was the least, so we would put it here. Our next smallest was 2/10, then 3/10, and then 325 thousandths. And then we would take a picture of our work. So you guys are going to have work just like this. This is where you're going to take your picture of all of your notes today. And then when it's time for you to do your assignment, you're going to do your assignment. Now you're going to have ones like this where you're comparing and ordering fractions and decimals, taking a picture, and using multiple choice. Like this. You're also going to have one right here where you have to compare or turn your fraction into a decimal, and then this is a story problem where you have to figure out if you're adding or subtracting and then find your correct answer and then submit your slides when you're done.